There was only the sound of the ticking clock and the quiet tension of people trying not to stare too long. Then the elevator dinged. Two men stepped out, one in a gray suit holding a clipboard, the other wearing a company fleece. Neither of them looked like hotel staff. They walked with purpose, their expressions tight. Vanessa recognized them immediately. The regional vice president, Brent Kessler, and district manager, Carlos Reno. The look of panic that flashed across their faces told her everything. Brent moved quickly, giving a brief nod toward Neil without slowing down. "Miss Claiborne, we are so sorry," he said, his voice quick and breathless. "I just got the call." Carlos followed close behind, nearly out of breath himself. "We're handling this right now." Neil tried to speak, but Brent's sharp glance stopped him cold. The receptionist froze too, eyes wide as realization hit her. She finally understood who Vanessa was. Her face drained of color, and she slowly stepped back from the counter. "Suite 1202 has been cleared," Carlos said, tapping rapidly on his tablet. "Your driver's being rerouted for morning pickup, and your usual fruit tray and espresso will be ready when you wake up." Vanessa gave a faint smile. "Thank you," she said. But she wasn't done yet. She wanted to see the shift. She wanted to witness how faces changed when power entered the room. She wanted to watch how respect suddenly appeared when people learned a name. Because being disrespected by strangers was one thing. Being disrespected by people who knew exactly who you were, that was another. Carlos leaned toward Neil, whispering sharply. Brent was already on his phone, speaking in clipped tones about HR policy and service violations. The tension that had once been pointed at Vanessa now turned inward, bouncing through the staff like panic finding new targets. Vanessa didn't gloat. She didn't raise her chin or fold her arms in pride. She simply walked back to the desk with slow, steady steps and placed her phone on the counter. "I'll take the 12th floor suite," she said calmly. "Same setup. Please send someone to make sure it's clean." The receptionist opened her mouth, but no words came. Vanessa didn't wait. She turned to Brent. "Have I been checked in?" "Just finished," Brent said, flipping through his clipboard. "You'll have 2 key cards and an incident report by the time you reach the elevator." "Good. And the rest?" He nodded. "We've issued a site-wide notification. Corporate audit is on standby. All current staff will complete retraining on guest protocol. Disciplinary reviews start tonight." Vanessa's eyes drifted back to the receptionist, who was biting the inside of her cheek, acrylic nails tapping against the counter, the rhythm different now, nervous instead of casual. "You'll speak to her," Vanessa said evenly. "Yes, ma'am," Brent replied quickly, privately, with HR present. Carlos started to say something, but Vanessa raised her hand slightly. "I'll speak to her too," she said softly. "Not now, after I've rested." She took her key cards, nodded once, and walked toward the elevator. Heads turned as she passed, guests whispered, some stared in silence. The elevator doors opened, and as they closed behind her, she caught one last glimpse of Neil, standing stiff and pale, sweat visible on his temple. On the 12th floor, her suite smelled faintly of lemon and eucalyptus. The fruit tray was ready, the espresso pods neatly stacked. A handwritten note with her initials sat on the table, clearly rushed but sincere. Vanessa walked slowly through the room, inspecting everything, not just for cleanliness, but for care, for intention. She wanted proof that someone still respected what she had built. Because this wasn't just a hotel, it was her story. She remembered being 33, standing in front of a skeptical bank in Minnesota that barely gave her a chance. They offered terrible loan terms and practically dared her to fail, but she didn't. Nearly 20 years later, she was standing in one of her own penthouse suites, still having to prove herself. Her phone buzzed, a message from her assistant. "Everything's in motion. Let me know if you want a media statement." Vanessa paused. She could have gone public easily. One post and the internet would have exploded. One interview and headlines would have written themselves. But she didn't want that tonight. This wasn't about revenge or rage, it was about respect and how easily people forgot what that looked like. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded. Outside, the city pulsed quietly. Cars passing, a distant train horn. Inside, the silence was heavy. Then came a knock. Room service. A young man entered with a tray, a fresh espresso, a note of apology from the kitchen, and an offer for a complimentary massage. Vanessa thanked him gently and closed the door. She sipped her espresso slowly and looked out the window at the city lights flickering across the skyline. Something in her shifted, not just about the hotel, but within herself. At exactly 6:30 the next morning, Vanessa Claiborne descended the elevator, not as a guest, but as the CEO. Her charcoal gray suit was sharp, her blouse crisp white, her heels echoing through the marble floor. She carried no anger, only purpose. Conversations in the lobby quieted when she appeared. Brent and Carlos were already waiting, tired, folders in hand, two untouched coffees on the table. They looked like men who hadn't slept. Vanessa nodded to them and walked straight to the small conference room near the concierge desk. Inside sat assistant manager Neil, the receptionist, her name tag read Kayla Mendez, and a woman from HR named Marta, a notepad already open in front of her. Vanessa didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table, arms folded. No one spoke. The silence was heavy. Finally, Vanessa said quietly, "Would someone like to explain what happened last night?" Kayla looked down immediately. Neil cleared his throat but said nothing. Vanessa waited. Kayla whispered, "I just didn't think. I didn't expect. You didn't expect someone like me to own this building," Vanessa finished, her voice calm. Kayla nodded faintly. "Was I rude to you?" Vanessa asked. "No, ma'am," she shook her head. "Did I raise my voice? No. Did I threaten anyone? No." Vanessa took a slow breath and turned to Marta. "This isn't a firing squad," she said, "but I do need accountability." Marta nodded. Carlos added, "We're issuing a formal write-up. Kayla will be removed from the front desk until retraining is complete. Neil will go under review." Vanessa nodded once, then finally sat. She looked directly at Kayla. "How long have you worked here?" 4 months. "And in that time," Vanessa asked, "how often have you thought about who built this hotel?" Kayla hesitated. "I just assumed it was some corporation, investors, maybe." Vanessa let the silence stretch. "Do you know how many properties I've built?" Kayla shook her head. 17, Vanessa said, "from Baltimore to Phoenix. Every one designed with care, with heart. I built this brand because I was tired of being treated like a shadow. So tell me, why when I walk into my own lobby am I still invisible to my own staff?" Her tone wasn't angry. It was tired, heavy. Carlos cleared his throat. "We're issuing a memo today. Mandatory inclusivity training across all Claiborne hotels." Vanessa looked at him. "Make sure it's not just another checkbox. I don't want people memorizing lines. I want them to understand what respect looks like when no one's watching." Brent nodded. "Consider it done." Vanessa walked back into the lobby. A new agent stood at the desk, smiling politely. She returned the nod. Everything looked normal, but she could feel it. A quiet shift beneath the surface. Change beginning, not with speeches or apologies, but with small, deliberate corrections. She took the elevator to her suite. On the nightstand, a folded note waited. It read, "Miss Claiborne, thank you for your grace. I'll do better. Kayla." It wasn't fancy, but it meant everything. Vanessa folded it carefully and slipped it into her purse. Downstairs, her car was waiting. The doorman opened the door with a respectful smile. "Safe travels, Miss Claiborne. Hope to see you again." "You will," she said softly. As the car pulled away, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had left something behind. The weight of being misjudged, the quiet ache of explaining her worth. What replaced it was something stronger: growth, understanding, change. The ride to the airport was silent. Vanessa sat with one hand on her purse, the other holding Kayla's note. She didn't need to read it again. It was enough to know it existed. Outside the window, the city passed by. Gas stations, bakeries, brick buildings. This wasn't where she planned to be this week, but maybe she was meant to be here, not for business, but for the reminder that respect isn't automatic, it's learned. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Tired of how quickly people make assumptions, tired of how often worth has to be explained. But she wasn't bitter. She carried memory, and memory, used right, is power. As the airport signs came into view, she thought of her younger self, that woman in cheap flats